So, in my first relationship, my partner recommended that I go hire one of her friends for 4 hours to get help. And so I paid $400 for a rant about how terrible men are. And got absolutely no value, and so this was not encouraging, and that put me off therapy for a while. Later, my partner said, well, she kind of owned up that that's what her friend generally did, and so I guess it was, a little bit of a control tactic. Let's have someone tell your partner how terrible they are so that they won't stick up for themselves, something like that. And this definitely led to some leeriness. When I did another couples therapy appointment with a couple, where there was an actual couple representing the couple. That was decent. And then I did some one-on-one therapy with a therapist, and I felt validated. So this was a really important thing. She validated me in a number of different ways, and And as I was dating women and learning to date women, I was aware that there was a fair amount of insanity, that there was a fair amount of inappropriate speed was one thing. You can kind of think of a decision in a healthy, conscious sense as, first of all, a conscious statement of one's values, and then a conscious statement of one's strategy for obtaining the values, then a conscious assessment of the results of that strategy. Meaning, if I want to stay safe and my strategy is to burn the seatbelts so that there are no seatbelts and then drive really fast, then, statistically speaking, millions of people doing that versus driving slowly with seatbelts, there's going to be a lot more fatalities. And so the last part of a conscious decision-making process is to analyze the data. Is the strategy delivering high yields of the stated values relative to the alternative strategies? And it was very clear to me that numerous women were divided in their values, meaning they had verbally stated values and then things that they actually did. And usually people value what they do. If someone says, I really want to lose weight, but then they eat endlessly, obviously they value losing weight less than they value eating, because we always do what we value. Now, yes, sure, there can be a split, and this is one of the things I would, encounter between what we think is a good idea if we did value. Like, I think it would be great if I did value losing weight more than I valued mindlessly stuffing food. But the reality is that when certain feelings come to the surface, I'd way rather stuff food than I would lose weight. And so I actually value avoiding certain feelings more than I value losing weight, and so that's what I'm doing. And so there were splits between stated values and embodied values. was one thing. Then there was a lack of consciousness in values. And then the strategies were often very dubious. One of the biggest ones, that I think of is, around transparency. If someone cares about you and you hide, they're going to bang into you because you're invisible, and they're not going to respect certain things that they don't know about because they're invisible. And so if someone cares about you, hiding who you are is not a very good strategy. It yields to unintended accidents. So there was this incredible layer of messiness at each point. Divided values, incoherent or dysfunctional strategies yielding results that were predictable, but were being moved from the protocol or the strategy to the individual. It would be as if I wanted to drive 120 miles an hour at night in the dark with no lights and no seatbelt, and then blame the car company for getting into an accident. And say, no, I did it fine. In fact, that's how I like to drive a car. I'm just going to blame the car company every time there's a wreck and ask for a new car if I'm still alive. And that, that didn't seem like it made a lot of sense. And then there was also, the other thing, and part of this divergence, I want a soulmate, I want a relationship, but I don't want to spend any money, I don't want to work, I don't want to think, I don't want to have to talk about vulnerable things. I just want it to happen without me doing the things that make it happen. So that was another phenomena. And then there were times when I would be the target of shock and blame. Like, why, you creep, you did this. It's like, wait a minute. How could I possibly have known, given that you avoided talking about this, you wouldn't answer the question, you distracted in this, and then you surprised me with this? I mean, that's insane. And so all of this stuff came up with feeling like, I didn't want to begin relationships with those odds of just blowing up in smoke and stuff. And so there was another phenomena, which was dominance. I don't like fighting, for example. I don't see particularly any need to. So if someone starts getting, aggressive in various ways, I may back down simply as to avoid the escalation. I may withdraw from the relationship, but I may back down and just say, that's not how I want to solve this, and there's no real need to fight about this. I can just go find another partner. And so, so that's another problem. Or the other thing could be happening. I'm very articulate, and so someone could be agreeing with me just because they don't want to articulate their own opinion. And if they agree with me, they don't have to. Sounds okay. I'll go along with, with what you're saying. And so I saw various values in having a relationship therapist. Number one, to equal and represent the whoever was the underdog in the relationship. So whoever's voice was being drowned out by the natural dominance of the other. To validate and equal that dynamic. The other was to demonstrate value in the relationship and commitment. I ran into a lot of women who kind of put forth the idea that they were too poor to be in a relationship. And I did the math, and it seemed like if anyone could come up with $300 a month, that's really all you needed to put into a relationship. You just don't do expensive things every night. You have to eat whether you're in a relationship or not. You have to have a car whether you're in a relationship or not. If you're living somewhere, your rent doesn't change just because you're in a relationship. But you might go out to dinner, you might buy each other gifts, you might save up for a vacation, or you might pay for some joint therapy. And so I decided that, well, the first thing I decided and understood was that there was not actually anyone who couldn't afford a relationship. So if, I met one woman, for example, she said, oh, I can't afford that. I've got to pay $75 a week to have my nails done. It's like, oh, I see. So the way your nails look is more important to you than whether you're in a relationship for me, because they both cost the same amount a month, and I don't care a shit about your nails. In fact, I would prefer if they were natural nails. So you want this and that and all this stuff every week, fine. But if you're telling me that you believe, because this is where behavior ties in with belief, that you believe that you will be happier, that your life will have more value if you do this $75 a week makeover than if you're in a great relationship. Well, you have more belief in the happiness producing potential of a makeover than you do in a relationship. Now, the problem with this kind of belief is it's incredibly self-fulfilling. Because, first of all, if you insult me with that projection, you're getting an insulted partner as opposed to a valued partner. Well, an insulted partner is not going to co-create as meaningful a relationship as a valued partner. So you've already got a different person because you're sending the message, you're not valuable, you're not valuable. The same is true with, with yourself, meaning if you don't believe a relationship has more potential than a pedicure, you're also saying that you're dumb, because that's a dumb analysis. Now, in a materialistic, reductionistic, terrified and traumatized cult, it could be normal, but it's still dumb. It's normally dumb. It's a common response. Apathy is a common response to getting hurt repeatedly, etc. But that's not an intelligent response. Discernment is a far more intelligent response than apathy. When a relationship, in truth, could be the best thing in your life or the worst thing. So you don't just say, okay, I could give a shit about relationship because it could be the best thing or the worst thing, and I've experienced it being the worst thing. The intelligent place to focus is, if it could be both, how do I determine that it becomes the best thing and not the worst thing? But that, of course, requires skill, responsibility, belief in oneself. When you believe in yourself, you develop skills. When you develop skills, you succeed. And so there's a whole bunch of problems that lie beneath this not willing to invest. And so, the reality is that if both people believe that the relationship can and will be wonderful, if both people have their heads screwed on halfway decently, and if both people act accordingly, it will be. That's just the reality, because only an idiot thinks that complicated, intense, meaningful things happen without any work, without any effort and energy. If Elon Musk said that he was going to Mars and he had $100, wish me luck, we'd know he's an idiot. Because an undertaking like that takes a good $100 billion, and that's what SpaceX has, and it takes lots of work, and he's putting in 100-hour weeks, and so you think, that's about right. If you put in 100 hours a week and you put up $100 billion and you work at it for 10 years plus and counting, and you hire the best people around, that's about what it takes to go to Mars, so good for you. And relationships are very complex. In some ways, relationships are more complex than going to Mars, because rockets don't have feelings. Rockets don't have beliefs. Rockets don't have cultural programming. Rockets are a lot easier to control than human beings. And so a rocket might be damned difficult to control, but to predictably control a human being, I mean, there is no software that's going to do that, every single time the way you can with a rocket and stuff. And so in some ways, relationships are much more difficult. And because they're more complex, they have more dimensions, more variables. So that suggests that believing in the potential of a relationship requires the willingness to show up. Now, I went through a period of, on the first or second date, asking a partner, would they be willing to agree, if they'd like to open up the relationship and form a container, would they be willing to agree to go to a joint therapist once a month? So we're talking about a $100 commitment there. With the goal of expanding and growing the potential of the relationship. So that was one thing. And two, would they agree to if I thought they were making a mistake if either one of us wanted to end the relationship and the other person thought it was a mistake, that we would go to a therapist once prior to ending the relationship, and after a 2-hour therapy session, if both people still wanted to end the relationship, that they would, but that they would check in with a therapist first. And this was particularly to kind of eliminate the blow-off, kind of careless, addictive, I don't want to feel my feelings, I don't want to feel that part of me, you're bringing it up because it's a good relationship, and so I'm going to get rid of you, because crappy relationships don't bring up your stuff that much. Because you don't feel that much, because the other person is treating you poorly, so you don't open up your heart in a meaningful way, and so you don't deal with your shadow and stuff in the same way that you would if someone really loves you and you're unfamiliar with being loved and stuff. And so there's that dynamic. And so I required that, and then there were several relationships I was in where there were some patterns that were in denial. The same thing kept happening, and the woman would say, no, it's not happening. And I said, we can do one of two things. We can end this relationship, or you need to agree to go to therapy with me, twice a month, once a month, once a week, whatever it is. And so it was a filter of value and commitment, and also taking off the load. When you're in love with someone and you want to make them happy, and the last thing they want to hear is their shit, it's a bit of a divide. But the therapist isn't in love with the person and isn't trying to make them feel good in that moment. The therapist is trying to help them grow long term. And so it takes that load off of a partner and a lover. And then in that situation, I would just introduce the dynamic that I was seeing repeatedly to the therapist, and then let them and the therapist, work on that. Now, and as part of that, also protection against shock and abandonment. And there were several early dynamics where, I just felt whiplashed and abandoned. And so, someone that tends to whiplash and abandon someone is not the kind of person who will agree to go to a therapist at all, because the therapist may shed light on their whiplashing abuse cycle. And if that's their defense, or they just don't care that much about themselves or other people, they don't want to learn about it and do anything. And so one of the things that I realized was good about having a conversation about going to a therapist was that it filtered out more healthy and serious people from more careless and unconscious people. Because only the thoughtful people lit up around the idea of such an arrangement. Because if you're a thoughtful person and you've been around a little bit, and you care about yourself and your partner, and you care about your relationship, you don't want it to end because you or your partner has no idea what they're doing and doesn't know that. You want it to only end for a good reason, like it should end. And so but a careless and unconscious person, first of all, expects the relationship not to last to begin with, and so they protect their feelings. But also, they don't want to get conscious of it and understand their responsibility and stuff. And so, by requiring that, even more important than the therapy itself, what I was looking for is, are you the kind of person who is thoughtful and cares about relationship? Because the way I read it, if you said, that's a smart thing to do, I'm more than happy to spend a few $100, whether it's a month or as a one-time thing, to see that we don't end in the wrong way for the wrong reasons. I don't want that, and you don't want that, and I like the guy that doesn't want that. You're a great guy, and I like the fact that you've thought about this. That's the kind of person I'd want to date. And the person that says, oh, sheesh, God, can't I just fuck around a little bit without all this heavy stuff? It's like, okay, that's what you're doing, is fucking around and avoiding things, and so go ahead, you can. Just not with me, and certainly not calling it a relationship. So go ahead. And so it helped me filter those two groups of people. And I would say that the filtering is one of the single biggest uses to me of this type of dynamic. Because I give a relationship a better chance of success if someone believes enough in it to pay money regularly and take time regularly to talk about uncomfortable things. Because that's a vote of confidence. So if someone's doing that, that in and of itself, that attitude and that belief is almost more important than whether you have a good therapist or not, because that will pay off. And so what I'm partly testing is, do you have that? Do you believe in us? Because if you do, $100 or whatever is nothing. If you don't, this will flush it out. You're not willing to pay $100, but you're willing to spout out that you believe in us, because it gets rid of the argument. Then you can just go off and have your own, true feelings, but you don't have to look bad or be in an argument. So it filters that out. And then finally, a good therapist is fun. And so it's fun. You can talk about your successes. Here's how we grew here. This is how we grew this. You have a nice drive up to the therapist, a nice drive back. You talk about meaningful things. It's fun. So good therapy is fun. And then the other reason is a container for charged subjects that neither person will hold. And this is about, I would say, 20 to 30% of my endings come from, if I ask the other person, what's going on? They say nothing, nothing, nothing. And so I say, okay, here's what's going on for me, and I need you to hear it and respond to it. And it's a charged topic. Now, if I get raw open in the charged topic, and the other person interrupts to invalidate and bring in the thing that they refused to talk about, for days and weeks and whatever, then I'm being not only not validated and empathized with, I'm being, devalued, dishonored, interrupted in a painful terrain. And often it's a defense, but even if it's not a defense, if they throw open their raw thing, well, I have this. Now you've got two raw things open at the moment. And usually I can pause mine, close it down, deal with their thing, and say, are you satisfied? Do you feel heard, etc.? And then go back to my thing, but not always. Because sometimes, as soon as you turn the attention to them, they hide their feelings again. Oh, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So can we go back to my thing? Well, they don't really want to, but okay, fine. Then they interrupt and bring in the thing again. They will not honor my thing, and they won't let me honor their thing. They keep their thing in kind of reserve to attack. That is a pattern. Now, a therapist can hold my charged topic and also challenge a partner to do that, and so that there's use in that. And it's not always a good therapist. I got really mad at one girlfriend who was Catholic because it just infuriated me that an intelligent, kind woman thought she was more loving than God, because she would never burn gay people alive in a lake of fire, but God would. So I'm better than God, I'm more loving than God, but I bow to a sociopath. And this just got me so furious that I really vented in my therapy session. And rather than empathizing or just sitting there, she burst into tears. It really broke her heart. Just how angry I was and how disgusted I was with her version of Catholicism. And that was the end of the relationship. In certain ways, that relationship was the best in my life by far. But, the therapist couldn't hold my anger. I couldn't hold my anger. She couldn't hold my anger. And then when she flipped into her tears and stuff, I couldn't hold her tears, and nor could the therapist do a particularly good job. And so, I was not, going to apologize for being angry about that, but I was, of course, sorry. I could feel how much pain she was in, and I was very sorry about that. But it's like, why are you in pain about this? Why don't you get it? You're not better than God. If you can forgive your gay neighbors, so can God. Stop pretending that he's a dick and you're not, and just cut it out, and that was the end of it, and so, there have been other times where the therapist could hold that anger and stuff, and could hold space, and so that's the process of couples therapy, and I would say that over time, part of me got tired of just doing over and over again. I think I brought like 5 or 6 couples to couples therapy, and it didn't lead to any of those relationships going anywhere. The therapist pretty much agreed and understood with why I left each of those relationships, and agreed and understood why that woman, who found her religion, under attack in our session, left me, and so. And I wasn't growing as much, going through kind of similar terrain, and so I have not done couples therapy with my current marriage and wife, but I agree with my things here, and with my current wife, there was no question whatever that she was all in and willing to work hard, and there's no concern about shock and abandonment. She doesn't like talking that much, and so I'm not sure how fun it would be. But that is actually a good thing. As I think about this, maybe she would talk in the right couples therapy dynamic in a way that she doesn't with me, and so that's a good reason to go just on its own, just to find out. And then we've done a good job of holding charged things. I'm usually the one, I bring up things sometimes rather than hold them. She gets triggered and charged by what I bring up. And then so far, I've either said up, time out, and just taken some space until I can hold myself. And then once I can hold myself, then I can hold her. And then I will reinitiate for the most part when I can hold her, help her out of to the point where she can hold herself, and then she can hold me, and then that kind of works its way out. So that's my evolution of work with couples therapy. And I've also come to the conclusion that there is at least 30% wrong. There is at least 30% wrong or suboptimal with the whole concept of a therapist. Because if you think about it, the therapist is the only one who's not involved in your life. And so you drive an hour to tell the one person who isn't involved everything. And then you don't tell all the people who are involved. And the therapist pledges to keep your information confidential. But what about the idea of a therapist pledging to tell everyone in your life in such a way that would help them get it? That seems like a lot more useful service than I'm going to take all this information that people in your life need to know, and I'll go right along with you and hide it all from everyone. So that's a flaw right there. Then there's also the idea in a chauvinistic culture that being emotional is unprofessional and somehow subhuman. That if you were cool and valuable, you wouldn't be so emotional. And that's, of course, completely fucked up, because if you're really engaged and embodied, you can flow the full intensity of all your emotions, and you get through them and you move on and you don't carry the charges. As opposed to, no, I'm cool and carrying these things for 10, 20, 30 years and never dealing with them. So that's completely backwards. But within that framework of, you can hear the message of a therapist is, I'm so fucked up because I have intense emotions. And I'm so embarrassed that I'm a human being that I have to drive an hour away where nobody knows me and pay someone who's not going to tell my dirty secret that I have feelings. And that this becomes then a shameful secret. You know that I'm not as valuable as everyone else, but I'm paying you to shut up about it, kind of thing. And that's, of course, a tremendously destructive and absurd message. That the only people who will listen to your deepest feelings are people you pay hundreds of dollars to shut up about it and put up with it. And that's destructive. So it's incredibly dishonoring. Why aren't there 5 people in your life who know all of that stuff, living in a healthy culture that teaches emotional literacy, as opposed to driving off in the middle of nowhere and telling a complete stranger everything they can't do anything about? You tell the therapist, I'm not interested in my husband in bed. Like she's going to do something about it. She's not the one that needs to know. Your husband is, and so, but he doesn't know. Why? Because you preferred to drive and pay a stranger to talk about that with her. It's also boring because she's not going to change anything. It's not incredibly exciting to tell someone who's not going to change your life at all. You tell your husband the truth, your whole life may change. Maybe there'll be a divorce, maybe this. So it's exciting. There's no boredom. And so that's another, issue. Then there's the fact that many therapists are not trained in trauma. And many therapists go numb through overexposure to other people's pain. Now, this is a devastating message for people who have gone through abuse. Because if you've gone through abuse and you realized, for example, dad was molesting you and mom didn't care. She knew, but she didn't want to be raped, so she let him rape you. And so she pretended like nothing's wrong. She made you some pancakes the next day, but that's all. Happy days, nothing's going on, it's fine. And so everyone around you colludes in the secret. And so you don't get that this is a horrendously big deal. You go numb as well to fit in with everyone else. I guess adults and grown-ups just abuse young people. And so if you tell a numb and anesthetized therapist who's hearing this kind of stuff all the time that you were raped by your husband, and then before that by this boyfriend, and then you're raped by someone at work, and then you were raped by your father, which is interesting. See you next week. Time's up. You can get the same message. You don't matter. This is not a tragedy when this is an absolute outrage. And the child inside has never gotten the message that they matter, that they're valuable, and that's what they need to hear. And they're not going to hear that by a therapist that demands hundreds of dollars just to learn about it and is going to keep your secret and not do anything about it. What you need is to see a grown-up somewhere, call the police, say, I'm coming home with you, I'm not letting you go home with that guy. And then it's like, oh, I matter, because that's what's sick. I got the disease that I didn't matter because first my father fucked up my future and risked my life. Secondly, my mother let him do it. Thirdly, no one else was interested. I went to school in a culture of denial and delusion. Then I went to a business world that says if you have any feelings about anything, keep them at home. And now finally I'm going to a therapist and she's behaving the same way as if nothing's wrong. Something's very wrong, but it's not with the victim. What's very wrong is a cult with that degree of collusion and delusion. And so in that sense, it's not good that you have to pay someone for secrecy and stuff who's acting as if there's no problem. I had this come up with my own sexual abuse, and it destroyed the therapeutic relationships. Because I said, if you're okay with this, if you're okay with just saying, see you next week, you're fucked up. I don't feel heard. I don't feel safe. I don't feel like my feelings matter because they don't matter enough for you to take action. I need help. And you're just showing up for our time as if your only job is to collect checks and hear about my abuse. This is not okay. People need help now. There are other victims right now. What the fuck are you going to do about it? And that's when the therapists, plural, got scared. Oh, it's not our job, I'm here to help you move on. It's like, I'm not interested in moving on. Help the victims. Stop the next abuse. What are you going to do about it? Then they become the child, right? And so that's another, it's like, what, there's no fucking grown-ups in the whole fucking world? Parents, fucking partners, therapists, the public, no one's a grown-up? Well, they're grown up, they're old, but there's no adults. There's no adults. People that have a sense of ethics and character and empathy for other human beings. And so this just really, it's blown. That's probably the other reason I haven't done therapy. With my wife, who I met after all this, is because it's pretty cowardly on some level, because there's also the one-sided aspect of emotions, meaning most therapists are not mature enough emotionally that they can let you know and see their stuff and see your stuff and still be supportive and put you first, because they're not psychologically literate any more than you are. Sure, they've read the books, but that doesn't reset their childhood templates. So most therapists compensate for their lack of emotional maturity by making sure that you're the only vulnerable one, which is one way you can feel ashamed, particularly if you're carrying things. Our culture shames many of its victims. And shames you if you're anywhere involved certain scenarios because they're taboo. And so if you're the one carrying the shame because the therapist is not revealing anything and you have to pay, you have to pay, you have to drive there, and you have to begin and end on their schedule. And at the end of all that, you're the one carrying the culture shame through the involvement with whatever taboo it is. And then they act as if it's no big deal, that they're not going to do anything about it. That can be an incredibly shaming experience. And I found it profoundly humiliating. So I fought with each of the therapists' passivity around this. And they each got defensive and lost container in various ways. And I said, I don't need to take care of your feelings. If you can't hear your ineptness around this without getting reactive, even when I'm fucking paying you hundreds of dollars, go fuck yourselves. Go get another degree in therapy. Learn something where you can be useful. Because I didn't really need you before this. Now that I need you, I've been abused by one therapist, and then the others are falling apart dealing with it. It's fucked up. So that's the shadow side of therapy, which I discovered after one therapist, violated a number of things under the influence of psychedelics, and then, that blew up in my face, and then all of his cronies, colluded to hide it, which created PTSD, and then the other therapists didn't, the idea that we as a culture will do this to our people, and then other people won't even touch it unless they're paid, and then, it's just an insulting thing. You want to engage with adults who know the honor and dignity of love, who know the terrain and say, it is my deepest honor that you would trust me here. I'm honored. There is no place I'd rather be than holding your grief and your pain in this deepest of our cultural wounds that is not your fault. It's on all of us, and if I want to live in a mature culture, it's on all of us to help, support, and respond here. And interestingly, it was victims of sexual abuse who helped me much more than therapists in this terrain, because they did it out of love. They didn't ask to be paid. They asked me what was good for me, as opposed to telling me when they could pencil me into their schedules and stuff. So that's a definite bitterness and regression, and so that's partly why I think it's healthy, because the unhealthy aspect for the child who's been repeatedly abused, etc., is to say, I'm not valuable enough for anyone to do anything. That's why all these horrible things are happening, because I'm not valuable. And that's the worst thing you can come away with after paying money to a therapist. I'm not valuable, they're valuable. My feelings aren't valuable, their feelings are valuable. My needs aren't valuable, their needs are valuable. They need me to show up at this time. They need me to stop crying at 1:50. But I need to cry for 3 hours. But of course, my needs aren't important. The fucking therapist, wants to be able to make as much money as possible, and just in case someone wasn't emotional in their boring sessions, then they want to schedule you tightly so they make the maximum amount per day. And the fact that I'm an inconvenience in having feelings is they're going to do what they're going to do. That is the worst possible message anyone can come out of therapy feeling. And I felt it repeatedly over and over again, this and that and the other. And so it just, it seemed important to fight. And some of the therapists got quite dirty. One called me a pedophile and said he would threaten to expose this and that, which turned out to be his fantasies, because he couldn't track what was actually going on. He tried to figure out what he was talking about. And it's like, well, therapists are as fucked up as anyone else, often more so, because some of the reasons that people go into therapy is they've got all kinds of fucked up issues in their own lives. They try and study psychology because it's such an important topic, because they feel so fucked up inside. And it's such a relief to have people pay you money to talk about their stuff so that they don't feel so bad. And so that's, I like to talk about that for the victims, for the clients. Because if we think that therapy exists so that therapists can make more money more conveniently. We're clueless. And the therapy will, in fact, reinfect the underlying valuelessness of the disease. And so on that level, who needs them? And, then it comes back to this is not your fault that therapists are like this. It's not your fault that therapists abuse you. It's not your fault that parents abuse you. You need lots of love and caring by people who are adult enough to know it's an honor to love you in those locations. The fact that there are very few adults in our culture, again, has nothing to do with you. It has to do with materialism, rampant guilt and religious shame, chauvinism, misogyny, a shadow-averse culture, the repeated trauma with being traumatically illiterate, the insistence on learning algebra rather than emotional literacy, and any number of other things that have nothing to do with you. They have nothing to do with the people abusing you either. They got all that shit dumped on them as well. It's not terribly personal. And so that's all in my evolution. And so I haven't gone back to a therapist. And I noticed with some humor and disgust that when I did a documentary on traumatic abuse, I reached out to 100 therapists that deal with trauma and sensitivity and various things like that. And not one of them wanted to be interviewed. So it's like, you are cowards, aren't you? You want everyone else to pay you hundreds of dollars to listen to their vulnerable feelings, to expose themselves to you. But you won't expose yourself on a documentary and share anything, even though it could help sexual abuse. It could help the very people who need the most help, but you're not interested. It doesn't fit in your little box. It's not as convenient. You might get uncomfortable being exposed to the world, but you want your clients to expose themselves to you. And listening to the therapist talk, well, what's it for? And who watched this? And I'm not sure I'm comfortable talking about my approach on in front of other people and stuff like that. If you want to pay me and you talk about your stuff, fine, I'm all open. But I'm not gonna. So it just seemed just a little bit of a flaky disappointment. It's like it never occurred to me that all 100 would have excuses and passive reasons not to participate at all. And it's just disgusting. It's like if someone asked to interview me about trauma, I would do it in a heartbeat, and it's not even my profession because I want a culture where people grow around this. So anyway, that's the point where I'm at right now with not just couples therapy, but therapy in general. Most of us in Western culture have an underlying disease that could be summed up in saying that the inner feminine in men and women, the goddess, is chauvinistically devalued and shamed. That has caused a huge rupture in the psyche and a huge imbalance that leads to self-destructive behavior that is consistent with the belief I don't matter and I'm not wanted as a being. It is the beingness that is feminine. The doing is masculine. If I make money, my money is wanted, but my being is not wanted. That's feminine. And so that's the core disease. And so if unless we can hack that disease and heal that disease by the very message, it's not about money, it's not about what your status is, it's not about your gender, it's who you are. You matter because you are, and I matter because I am. And so it's an honor to deal with these things because you exist. Now we're talking about terrific terrain. So that's kind of my feeling, and it's harder in my experience to get that feeling from someone when you're paying them money. It's not at all impossible, but it's when someone says, I want to be there with you and you don't have to pay me a dime and I'm honored to be here. That's when your humanity says, wow, there might really be some value in here. and someone else sees it. Yes. And that's where the real underlying root disease begins to heal.